Welcome to this week's episode of Points in the Podcast. I am Elias Schuster. As always, I'm joined by Matt Rooney. And Matt, this is episode number 3. Episode number 3 in the dog days of the NBA offseason in the summer.
Not a lot.
We're chugging along.
We're powering through. I thought last week we said, maybe hopefully we can scratch out 30 minutes here, 40 minutes. We can get ourselves like 50 because we got into some good Eastern Conference debates. I think, unfortunately, with our Western Conference stuff today, it's a little bit more cut and dry than the East, which is just seems like we talked about every team being a prove-it team. But I think we'll still have some fun with this one.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, it's not like there isn't things to talk about in the NBA. There always is. But I think, the thing that listeners and people have to understand is like, one, we want to save certain conversations for closer to the season, but also we understand that this is not a time of the year where most people are caring about the NBA and tuning in. So we're not going to waste good conversation on or waste certain topics at this point in the summer. We can when we get a little bit closer to training camp and the preseason, and we know that there's more people invested and more people, interested in certain things, then we can talk about stuff then. But this is a kind of a good time where we can just address the news of the summer, things that have been happening, and then just kind of go from there. And like we said, there's definitely topics we'll touch on each week, like the Prove It teams. The last episode, if people haven't listened to that, we talked about the Eastern Conference a little bit, and just each of us picked about 2 or 3 teams that we thought had the most to prove in the East. And like you said, that's what we'll do with the Western Conference later in this episode. So hopefully it's just a nice little weekly dosage of some NBA content, gets you caught up on some of the latest news, and then something to think about for the rest of the week.
Doing this podcast for the last 3 episodes has truly made me appreciate how the NFL stays relevant all year long. Like the NBA is by far the closest sport to that.
Right.
But the fact that the NFL is able to be like, you could truly have a year-round podcast and not run out of stuff to talk about is mind-boggling.
Well, that's the thing
it's
too.
Just, like, I know it's like football's king, and that's part of it, but it is mind-boggling to me because the NBA is, like I said, clearly I think second on the hierarchy of off season's the most entertaining and the most going on yearly, but like we're in a dead period, and with the NFL, like there are no dead periods. It's wild.
Yeah. Well, also it doesn't help that every single summer the NBA's dead period comes at the moment that the NFL really ramps up. You know, like with the season starting, and that makes people even less invested. But we're here. I want you to know, true basketball fans, we are here, and we are here for you. Okay, so we're gonna talk about as always. Let's start the show with a couple quick bullet points. So the first thing that we want to touch on news over the last week, the obviously biggest story and scary story revolved around LeBron James's son, Bronny James, was working out at USC and ended up going into cardiac arrest. The USC team, medical team, was able to respond quickly. It sounds like, from what we know from reports from The Athletic and statements made by LeBron James and his family. It appears, and I think TMZ Sports also was one of the first to report on the matter. And LeBron James' son Bronny was rushed to the hospital and treated there pretty quickly. It appears he went into stable condition, which is great. And we found out, I believe yesterday evening officially, that he has been discharged from the hospital. I believe he's still, receiving medical care in terms of tests that are going on and things for them to learn more. But overall, seems like he's back on his feet in stable condition. So we're very happy to hear that about Bronny James, and obviously wishing our best to that whole family, because I mean that was a very scary tweet to wake up to.
It was so weird when it came out too that like in today's day and age, for that bit of news to basically be quiet for almost 24 hours, because the original Shams tweet was is it Shams or Shams?
Shams. I believe it's Shams. Yes.
Shams. Like the original tweet said, he suffered this incident. This incident happened yesterday, and like he went in the ICU and is already out of the hospital. So it's good that he didn't have that long of a stay. But the fact that it like went that long and didn't get leaked out at all is wild to me in today's day and age. But really, it's a scary moment. Good for him. Obviously, you hope at some point he gets back onto the basketball court and can play, but that's not first or
Right.
most important here. It's that he gets healthy. Doctors check him out. I'm sure he will have the best medical care, best cardiologist in the world taking care of him, and I'm sure LeBron will take him wherever he needs to go to get that care. So hopefully he's okay. I mean, glad that he's already out of the hospital, out of the ICU, and seems to be doing okay on the road to recovery. So fingers crossed that everything's good and he does get back onto the court. But again, that's farthest from anyone's mind right now.
Exactly. And I think, I think, like you said, it's one of those situations where a lot of people are on the edge of their seats, kind of waiting for more information to come out.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing that I would always recommend to people as well is, especially coming from, two people who work closely in sports, someone in myself who's covered, a lot of athletes, like, let's always remember that these people are, these are people just like just like you. If you had a medical situation in your family, a lot of times you need to take a step back. And
I don't think you'd be running to the Chicago Tribune.
Yeah, you're not running to the
Brian Windhorst and telling him what's going on.
Rightfully so.
Basis. Yeah,
the media, even though they're reaching out and curious, they aren't rushing to gain information. They'll get it when when they get comfortable in getting it. So we're happy that he's in stable condition and appears to be getting looked at. It appears to be okay for now, but hopefully he's all good and he can get back on the court. But scary situation nonetheless. Always weird to pivot from something like that, but let's move on.
Let's talk about some fun, interesting stuff.
Yeah,
not interesting is the wrong word, but some fun NBA stuff.
Right. The second biggest storyline of the past week, obviously, was Jaylen Brown signing his Supermax extension. He signed for 5 years, $303.7 million, the largest contract in NBA history. If anyone, this is always one of those weird situations, and I'll kind of, we were talking about the NFL earlier in the show, and I'll kind of attribute it back to the NFL right now, which is, a lot of people right away, at least maybe some casual NBA fans, they freak out and they say he's the highest paid player in the NBA. Jaylen Brown shouldn't be the highest paid player, and blah blah blah. Well, let's just remember how
contracts work. It's just whoever's next
works. Up. Yeah, it's whoever's next up. The NFL. The reason I brought them up was, well, remember when Derek Carr became the highest paid quarterback in
the quarterback one to me is the funniest because it's always like that guy really remember however long ago when it was Jay Cutler's turn to get paid with the Bears and people were Jay Cutler's that's what happens.
It's just how it works, and whoever is up next, is going to be the new highest paid player, and Jaylen Brown also, he helped himself in the NBA. There's being all NBA, that's is what makes you Supermax eligible. That was why it was a big conversation 2 years ago when a guy like Bradley Beal was up for his contract extension. I believe he made all NBA, 2 seasons before he signed his extension. There were, people had their eyes on whether Zach LaVine could do it before he signed his. So the Supermax is always something looming. Brown ended up getting the all NBA nod. And because of that, he was eligible on his next extension to receive the Supermax level number. And so that's what it looks like now, is $303.7 million over 5 years. And so
much money.
It is. Yeah. So that's why I have a hard time kind of digesting it, because for me, it is ridiculous to think, okay, he's the highest paid player in the NBA. It's hard to separate that, even though we know how the money works. We know how contracts work in the league. It's still hard to separate it sometimes, to think, okay, Jaylen Brown's the highest paid player in the NBA. And, he's making $90 million roughly on his contract, more than somebody like Zach LaVine, who I think personally, I of course I compare the two because we're both Chicago guys, but I had this conversation with a lot of people throughout this week. And I think it was on The Ringer, Zach Cram mentioned LaVine when having this conversation as well. And so it's just kind of easy to compare the two because LaVine signed his contract only one summer ago. And so these are two guys who are probably best suited to be number two on a team. LaVine has been number one, but I think both are best suited to be these number twos. You're not going to trust them to lead your team, to the promised land necessarily. I think Brown has been a little bit better than LaVine over the past couple of years. Some have pushed back on me to me for that thought, but I just think Brown has proven to be more of a two-way player at times. There's no question that Zach LaVine is the far more gifted scorer. I mean, he's better on that end of the floor, but it just depends on what you're looking at. And I think we can't deny Brown also has obviously played a big role in the team's success in the postseason. Say what you will about how the team has been built. He's been the second best player on a team that's gotten to the NBA Finals and has gotten to 4 Eastern Conference Finals in the past 5 or 6 years. So Anyway, I think the point is the money that does separate them $90 million is still absurd to think. That's not how big of a gap there is between those two players. Even if Brown is a little bit better than LaVine, that's a ridiculous amount of money to think that he's making. But again, this is just how these contract works now. We got to expect to see this with more and more guys.
Not to make the NFL comparison again, but after all these, like, Herbert's re-signed, Lamar's re-signed, Jalen Hurts, and like Patrick Mahomes is now the 8th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. Like, it's just
right, which seems weird.
That's just how it's weird. And now you're like, oh, like Chiefs, like, oh, well, actually, we got him on a little bit of a deal. So maybe that's where it's like,
well,
with,
yeah.
With and the Bulls, I was like, oh, we actually got LaVine on a little bit of a deal right now.
Well, definitely. Yeah. I mean, that's a conversation I think for even to have for another time is there's certain contracts now that are going to appear even more valuable. And I think LaVine's is one of them, and that can help us value. But yeah, I mean, Jokic, you think of Jokic being arguably the best player in the league, and he's making about 30-40 million less over his, new 5-year deal than Jaylen Brown is. But that's just how things are going to work. I think. As for whether or not he should have gotten it, if anyone just heard a noise, that was my dog. I'm sorry. My dog just jumped off the bed behind me. Oh, but right. When you look at...
we're a pro dog podcast.
Yeah, we're a pro dog podcast. Yeah, maybe I'll bring my dog on as a guest one time. When you look at whether or not the Celtics should have done it, there's going to maybe be some people who are put off by the money or whatever, but Jaylen Brown's only 26 years old. Jason Tatum's 25 years old. Technically speaking, when you look at what people consider to be, the prime years of your NBA career between about 27, 28 to early 30s, about 32 years old, those are two guys who have reached a pretty big peak and are still extremely young. And we talked about this a little bit last podcast when we talked about what that team still has to prove. They still have some time to prove it. And, these are two of the most talented wings in a league that has become very much driven by talented wings in a lot of ways. So investing in the two of them further, I don't really see how they could have chosen, not to do so.
That's the thing. It's like your hands are really tied. And even though it is the biggest, and Jaylen Brown is not the best player in the NBA and he's getting the most money, like, you kind of have to do it because you're never really going to get fair value for him in a trade. You're just going to get a whole bunch of first round picks and a couple pieces. And you hope one of those first round picks turns into something like Jaylen Brown, let alone Jaylen Brown. So it's like,
right.
What are you going to do? You have to do it. And I feel like the NBA, you're just more than any other sport. You're kind of locked into what you have. And you just kind of, like, we know that better than anybody as Bulls fans here. Like, you're kind of locked into what you have. And if you have one of these stars or fringe stars, like, you kind of have to keep yourself married to them because while they might not be able to get you over the hump, the other side of the coin isn't much better.
Yeah, like you said, if you're going to move Jaylen Brown, which is a big topic of conversation over the past really the 2 summers, just because, last summer, the whole conversation about Kevin Durant and whether or not the Celtics could use Jaylen Brown to try to trade him right after they made a finals run. That was a big, topic of conversation. And then this summer, just after they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals to the 8-seeded Heat, and people were just wondering, is it time to shake things up with this Celtics team a bit? And to their credit, they did. They added Kristaps Porzingis. They end up moving Marcus Smart. I mean, they made some relatively significant changes, but people were wondering, could Jaylen Brown be a moving piece, especially with the Supermax deal looming? And if Celtics want to give him that. But I think while it took some time to get the deal done, there's no question about it. We're about a month into free agency before he got that deal signed, or that extension signed, which also you become extension eligible a little bit past free agency, but whatever. It took a little bit longer than some expected it to. I still think it was always clearly the most likely outcome. It's just, you don't want to lose a player who has proven to be as talented as him. And like we said, he's still extremely young, and it's. I think you put it well. You're handcuffed a lot of times in the NBA, and if you trade Jaylen Brown, are you going to try to trade him for the number 3? Because you tried to trade him for the number 3 pick and Scoot Henderson. Like, I don't even know if Portland ends up doing that. Could you? But that's probably the best type of asset that you could have gotten is a number 3 pick, and then you're just playing the game of, okay, well, Scoot Henderson's.
I hope Scoot Henderson turns in Jaylen Brown. Like, that'd be great.
Yeah, but also, and maybe the timing is okay because Tatum's only 25, but it's also like, well, Tatum has proven he's ready to win right now. So then what are we doing? Are we not trying to win right now because we're developing Scoot and maybe we're set up for a little bit of more long-term success? But it just becomes the what ifs become greater when you trade him, obviously, than if you just keep him and you know what you have. And what you have right now is arguably the best team in the Eastern Conference and a team that has been competing for the title every single year. So makes sense. And it's a lot of money. And the contract definitely is going to look a bit, icky if Jaylen Brown can't continue to progress a little bit, because he definitely needs to develop as a ball handler. Turns the ball over way too much,
especially with Marcus Smart not there anymore. Like, those guys are going to be charged with handling the ball and kind of running the offense more. Him and Tatum, I should say.
Great point. Yeah, they're definitely going to need him to, some people think he has reached the peak that he's reached, but there's still areas he can improve. He took a step back defensively this past season. If he can kind of bump that back up, because he used to be a far more talented defender than what he's shown recently. If he can do those things, then it'll be at least a little easier to stomach. But if he does start to continue to plateau, there can be some concerns later on about how that contract feels.
I feel better now about the Celtics being one of my prove it teams in the East last week, because now, like, with this big money, especially in that market where it's a passionate fan base, to say the least. I don't want to say one that will turn on you quickly, but they kind of will. This year, Jaylen Brown, if there's gonna be some off nights for Jaylen Brown where the Celtics fan base is going to be giving, he signed his big contract, he's not as into it anymore. Like, they kind of need to win with that now. Otherwise, that contract's going to look real bad. Not necessarily like they could make a bunch of Eastern Conference Finals appearance and NBA Finals appearance and not win, and that is considered a success to outsiders. But in that city, if he doesn't win a title and has that big money for the next 5 years, he's going to be villain number one.
Well, him and Tatum, they just
I think him more so even than Tatum, because
those
guys, that fan base
more than Tatum.
Yeah, I think Tatum will eventually sign a big deal that will be bigger than Brown's, but I feel like Tatum is just very beloved in that city, and rightfully so. He's an awesome player, and Brown's kind of like the guy that needs to be the 1A to get them over the hump, or 1B to Tatum's 1A, and he just hasn't been able to do that yet. So if Brown has this massive deal, I feel like he's easier for them to turn on, or quicker for them to turn on, I should say.
Yeah, that's fair. And also, I mean, Tatum has been the guy, while we've seen fans frustrated at times with Tatum as well, just because he hasn't fully stepped into that alpha role that maybe they were hoping. But again, there's still a lot of time. He's still very young. Brown, I think, there's obviously a longer leash on a guy like Tatum, and money changes everything. We know it from covering the Chicago Bulls, with Zach LaVine. He goes from being, hey, this guy's super underrated, to a lot of fans screaming and yelling because now he makes max money. And
exactly,
even though he's performing very much the same, it causes your perception to be skewed a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how that first year goes, and how the Celtics if they can continue to keep things up. And because even if they end up struggling this season, even if it's not, if it doesn't make sense, even if it's uncalled for in a lot of ways, since he does make that kind of money now, this is the situation where it's like, okay, they move Porzingis, they move Smart, and then if they are bounced in the first or second round, people are going to turn to Jaylen Brown and start complaining about the fact that they gave Jaylen Brown that money, and, what's happening to the team? Are we going in the wrong direction? So it might not be called for, because maybe he plays fine, but a lot of times that's just how fans operate. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Okay. So lastly, with quick hitters, this isn't super newsy, but I think it's something that's still interesting to hit on real quick, is the fact that ESPN, they released kind of a post-offseason power rankings. They're first of sorts, and I'm assuming we won't see another power rankings maybe until training camp comes out. But I'll just read off the top 5 on their power rankings. Is the Nuggets, the Bucks, the Celtics, the Suns, and the Miami Heat in 5th, surprisingly. So I know that you have to, just my first thought on these power rankings, I know that you got to respect Miami, obviously, for making the finals run that they just did. But the fact that they're 5th to me is a little bit of a really, just because, I don't know. I don't want to be the guy that second guesses them, but let's remember that they did just finish 44-38 in the regular season. They were just one game away from missing the playoffs entirely. And so while I give them all the credit in the world for going on the run that they did in the postseason, there are still significant questions about, I think, whether or not they can sustain, or like they can sustain the level of success that they found. They lost a guy that was super valuable to them in Gabe Vincent during the playoffs. Kyle Lowry, like he had some moments in the postseason again, but he's not someone you can easily rely on. And I don't know. It's just, to me, they're based off their regular season. Throwing them as the fifth best team in the, could they be that? Sure. I'm not denying that they can't.
Yeah.
But I just don't know if I can sit here and believe that that's where they'll actually end up looking at the regular season. I don't know.
I'm with you there too. Like, they had a really nice run, but the team is going to look a little bit different. Like I said, Strus and Vincent are gone. Like, Lillard still looks like he'll probably end up there, but he hasn't yet. And I mean, we talked about Philly being polarizing, and they're probably still going to be a really good regular season team this year. The Lakers got better. Golden State's Golden State. Like, Cleveland got a lot better. I think they're being a little bit, too into the moment here. They're very, I can't think of the phrase that I'm trying to think of here.
No, well, I just want to say, you made
victims of the moment. Is that what? I don't know, but they're held prisoner to the moment. Like, it was a great run. They were really good in that run, but like, they were a bad 10 minutes from the Bulls away from not even making it out of the play-in. So maybe let's pump the brakes until they get Damian Lillard.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point that I completely left out and just reacted right away. The Damian Lillard situation, obviously, yes. If they end up with Dame, it's still, sometimes when you add a big star, it takes some time for things to mesh in the right way.
Yeah.
So it's still maybe pretty high to think that they could be the third best team in the East. But on paper, if you have Damian Lillard, if you have Jimmy Butler, if you have Bam Adebayo, then it's far more reasonable. So that's my bad. That was me under the assumption of looking at a team without Dame. But you're right. This is a team that's still.
But like, also in these power rankings, like, don't factor in Damian Lillard because he's not there yet, and a lot of things can happen. Like,
especially
we can't just assume.
That's a good point, because I mean, especially if it's a post offseason one or like post free agency, it hasn't happened yet. So post,
like, their team from the team that lost Game 5 of the NBA, it was 5 games, right? Game 5 of the NBA Finals is not as good as it was the team.
Right, they lost Strus, they lost
Strus, they lost Vincent. Those guys played pretty big roles for them. Like, I'm not saying that they're not going to be a very good team and be a team that's going to be right in the mix to make another run come next year's playoff time, but like, the way they stand right now, they are not the fifth best team in basketball, and that's okay. I'm not saying they won't get there, but this, again, it's power rankings, and this is what ESPN and stuff like that does to spark conversation. So we're talking about them, and we're clicking their articles, but like, they're not the fifth best team in basketball right now.
They got what they wanted in us by us sitting here and talking about it. So then other kind of bright spots are spots to mention in these power rankings. We see the Lakers come in at number 7. Obviously, if you're looking at Los Angeles at the start of last season, you're thinking this is probably pretty crazy. However, I hate that I like what they did this offseason a lot. I like what they did at last year's trade deadline as well a lot. So I don't want to ever really give the Lakers respect. I don't ever want to give LeBron respect. That's the well, no, okay, I will. I should say I respect.
Yeah.
I respect someone who's very good, but in terms of sports feuding, Lakers.
I don't want to acknowledge
that
his team is trending in the right direction right now.
Lakers not my favorite team. It's like, especially when you're a Chicago guy, Lakers, Celtics, it's not, you're not your favorite stuff. And then LeBron, obviously. But I can respect what they did at the deadline. I can respect what they did this offseason. It's undeniable that they have improved significantly to the team that started the 2022-23 season. Austin Reeves obviously took a major step forward last year. I do think they maybe overpaid Rui Hachimura, but I like the fact that they kept him. He showed really nice positive signs.
He fit well there too.
Yeah, he fit well. He was shooting the 3 ball very well during the postseason. D'Angelo Russell returning is fine. It at least gives us some of the spacing that they're gonna continue to need, around LeBron, which is always good. And then they were the ones that had Gabe Vincent from Miami. They add Taurean Prince from Minnesota. They took flyers on 2 young guys in Jackson Hayes and Cam Reddish. So now when you look at this Lakers roster, it's just far more like, oh yeah, that's a LeBron James team, and it's a pretty.
It only took him like 3 years to put it around him, but yeah,
and it's also a pretty freaking good LeBron James team, because we've seen what he could do with more of a ragtag group in Cleveland in 2016, and This is a team that's arguably better than that on paper, has far more depth, especially if a guy like Reeves continues to take steps in the right direction. And yeah, so I definitely think if this team is in the conference, because right now, I guess based off these power rankings, they have the Lakers as the third best team in the West. I think that's appropriate. However,
right.
if they end up the first, if they end up number 1 or number 2 in the West, I won't be surprised, just because the Suns, Beal, Durant, and Booker situation, as great as that offense is, huge defensive concerns still stand. And also, it takes a long time for guys like that to mesh. Just go back to Brooklyn. I'm not saying it'll be as dramatic as the Brooklyn situation, but there's you never know when guys are getting hurt, who's going to be available, but also it just takes time on the court to mesh appropriately. And then the Nuggets, there could always be a little bit of a finals hangover. I don't think they'll drop off significantly, but it's like if the Nuggets finished third,
I think they'll be right
Lakers
there in the playoffs next year, but I'm not sure they're going to go out and be the 1 seed again in the West.
Right. I don't think so either.
Very possible.
So yeah, if you're talking to me about like the Nuggets being 3rd or 4th in the West, I'm not going to be shocked. I'm not going to take them any less seriously come the postseason. I will take them. I'll arguably believe that they have the best chance of winning the finals still, but it's rare that you do maintain that number 1 standing, coming right off of a finals, because also you learn, I don't need to give that much effort in the regular season to feel good about my chances. So, the Lakers, I like that spot for them. I think that's the appropriate spot for them. It pains me to say, but they do have one of the kind of most well-rounded rosters. And also, speaking of what they can do, Anthony Davis, if Anthony Davis continues to stay healthy, then obviously that's a big move. To round out the top 10, they had the Golden State Warriors at number 8, the Cavs at 9, and the Grizzlies at 10. I'm fine with all that. The Clippers at 11 feels a little bit high to me, just because the availability of Kawhi.
Dallas at 14 seemed a little bit high to me, because we saw this roster for the most part, and they didn't do anything last year. But that one jumped out to me as a little high. It's like they just see the names.
I'd put the Kings above like the Clippers, who are at 12.
I think the Kings are a team on the up.
I would put So I don't know. The Clippers thing is a little bit surprising to me, just because that's still a lot of respect for 2 guys who haven't been able to stay healthy. And other than that, I mean, got teams that might be too low. I actually did think the Chicago Bulls came in maybe a little bit too low, just because I don't know if the Pacers should be above them, the Nets should be above them. That doesn't feel 100% right to me, just because I think Brooklyn's going to fall off a lot, because after what happened, losing Durant and losing Kyrie.
Yeah, I don't think that roster's all that.
I think they finished 3 games under 500 without them, without those guys. So, I don't know. And then the Pacers are still really young. They could surprise us, and they were doing really well when Halliburton was healthy at the beginning of last year, but they're just still so young, and it's hard to gamble on that. But that's the only real surprises in there. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. That's our first batch of power rankings that we've seen from the big boys out there, and we'll probably get more before training camp starts up.
I would have to think so. Should we talk about some Western Conference squads?
Yes, let's wrap up by touching on some Western Conference proof.
I started out. I got the first pick last week with the Eastern Conference, so let's give you the first pick here. Who's your number 1 Western Conference needs to prove it team?
Okay. Well, before I pick real quick, I want to briefly say that if you listen to last week's episode, the parameters are pretty wide open here, like for what we could pick. We just got to give a reasoning for why we think they should prove it, because I think you said it at the beginning of the show, Matt. It kind of just there's a lot of teams that have to prove it, and you can make a case for almost all of them, especially in the East. I mean, there's a greater middle ground there to work with in the Eastern Conference, but the parameters are very loose. We just got to pick a team that we think has a big reason to prove it this year. And I'm going to start things off with a team that we just mentioned in the Los Angeles Clippers. So I don't know if I would consider them with the most to prove, but the reason that I start with them is just because this is another year in to this Kawhi Leonard, Paul George situation. They finished 5th last year. They only had 44 wins. Obviously fizzle out early in the playoffs. This is an organization that has continued to have extremely high expectations over the past couple of years, and just has repeatedly failed to reach that mark. Again, a lot because of the injury issues. So yeah, I mean, this is a team that continues to get respect because of the talent that's on the roster. I understand it. But they also have a new arena coming. That's a big deal that we need to make sure we keep in mind is like they want to have stars in that building once they have that new arena ready.
Yeah.
But are these stars going to be Paul George and Kawhi Leonard? There were already Paul George trade rumors that started to emerge earlier this offseason. So, they're in the market for James Harden, which is, I think that's where Harden has said he's wanted to go, and they're kind of maybe the best suited just because they do have plenty of contracts they can throw in there to make it work, and maybe Philly
I'd
would
love
be
to see James Harden go there. That'd be such a fun team to track with the names and the ability to play issues.
Right. Yeah.
I should say stay healthy, not ability
stay
to play,
healthy.
but ability
Yeah.
to physically play, like be able to get yourself ready for a game.
And also, I just think if you add, if you're adding Harden, if you're trading for him, you're signing. He's playing for you for one season or so. I'm assuming that he's going to be, he exercised his option. He's looking for a trade. So then in a year from now, he's a free agent, which means you have to regroup all over again. So it would only be like a 1-year thing probably anyway, unless they do end up signing James Harden. But I don't know. That would be why they have to prove it. They would have to prove that works, and that's worth doing. So there's just a lot of questions about, I think, how much longer this group can go. Maybe could this season end up being whatever their unhealthy version of The Last Dance is? It would be like if The Last Dance was filmed, I don't know, a bunch of like injured. I just picture like old grandpas and like, I don't know. There's basically a time
Just
limit now.
A bunch of cameras set up in the training room.
Right. Yeah. But there's a lot here that they need to decide upon, whether these are the names that they're going to continue to keep around, or if they can get good packages if they wanted to trade Kawhi or even Paul George. This might not be what some think it would be, but they can get some assets to probably from a contending team.
Like you said, though, they got the new building coming up. There's just no chance. There's no chance they don't have 2 stars on that team. Whether it's I don't know who else you would have on that. When's the building supposed to be done? Like we're getting there, right?
Yeah, we're getting close.
I feel like it's
2 years, maybe
too quick. It'd be too quick of a turnaround to try and find stars to replace those 2 guys.
Yeah, you're not wrong. It's just
they're probably locked into those guys because they're not going into the building without a couple marquee names in LA as the second basketball team.
Right. No,
so I'm with you. Like those guys have to prove that they're like worthy of carrying it. Otherwise, you're going to have a fan base that just doesn't really care when that new building comes.
So yeah, so to finish it up, I was just looking it up to clarify. If they would trade for Harden, they would have Harden, they would have Kawhi, and they would have Paul George, all potential free agents 1 season from now.
Yes,
so,
I need this to happen. Let's do it. Give me Harden to the Clippers. If anything, that would be really fun to watch for a year.
So this is a team that kind of, it's not like the players have to prove it, but I think the organization has to kind of prove to themselves, is this going to be something that we continue to move forward with, or do we want to try to accelerate a rebuild here and see what we can do and if we can make maybe a younger team with a lot more upside as we head into like a new investment in a new building. So that would be my first my first choice. You go up next.
I'm going with Phoenix. I think that's an easy layup pick here in the West. Like they were in the finals. Was it 3 years ago with the Bucks? Was it three seasons ago now? And it seemed like they were kind of the next up team that was going to dominate out West. And it just seems every year they've kind of taken steps back. And Devin Booker's been unable to stay fully healthy. Obviously, Chris Paul is no longer there. He's never really been able to stay fully healthy. They went all in with KD, and then they fired Monty Williams and brought in Frank Vogel, who I guess is going to make them more defensively responsible and toughen them up, I guess is what they're saying.
It's a big question mark higher when you consider the amount of offensive talent that's now on their team. But I guess
maybe their thinking is we don't need that much offensive like scheme and help because we have these guys. But I don't know. Like this is the second time now, or I guess third time if you count to the Warriors. But like the second time KD's gone off and like he's the head of this super team, and he obviously flamed out awesomely in Brooklyn. And last year went, I don't know, a short amount of time, but didn't go great in Phoenix. And They go out and get Bradley Beal, another scorer, and they have their big three, and they really need to prove something now. Like they have them. They have DeAndre Ayton. They've done a decent job filling in the cracks as much as you can when you have 3 max contracts on a team. But it's about time to start proving it, because if you don't do it this year, I mean, are we going to see another breakup? What does Kevin Durant's legacy start to look like? Does he really care what his legacy looks like since he got his rings with Golden State? I'm not really sure. But since he left Golden State, you would think yes. There's a lot to prove in Phoenix for a team that we thought was going to be the next, 5-10 years running the West, and they've kind of taken steps back each of those years since making the finals.
Well, yeah, and I'll say, Durant only played 19 games total for Phoenix last year, and there's going to be some growing pains there as they learn to work
for sure
between both Booker and him. But the biggest reason they have something to prove is just because of how much of an investment not only they made in Durant. We first thought that was a major investment, and
then Beal,
but then going and adding Bradley Beal, I mean, that immediately adds that much more pressure on the organization. The thing is, they're connected to all these guys for well into the future now. So I guess maybe they view it as, well, if it's not next year, that's okay. But I'm assuming that Ishbia, the new owner's like, no, we should be competing for championships with Ishbia every single year. The question is we haven't really seen these big threes. I guess you have to go back to Miami, then you go to the Warriors with but that's kind of more of like a big two and then Clay and Draymond. So it's like big two and then a little smaller two. But like you got to go back to those groups, and then you saw Brooklyn try to do it, and that didn't, that fell through. And it's time for them to prove whether this one with Durant and Beal and Booker makes sense when it's extremely offensive minded. The other ones have made far better fit sense. These big threes that we've seen compete, the fit in Brooklyn doesn't make a lot of sense. It just there's not a primary facilitator among those three. Those three are all kind of subpar defensively. Booker has definitely taken steps in recent years. And I mean subpar currently. They all can be better defenders than what they've played in recent years. So that's the question: is do they play at a better defensive level now altogether? I'm definitely, they definitely have a lot to prove in terms of, was this investment the right one? Because to me, they don't have to win the finals, this year, but now obviously they have to be in it that was already almost the expectation with how well they performed 3 years ago. But now it's like, if you're not getting to West Finals almost every single year, competing to get there at least, like, what are you even doing here? So, but there's major questions too about their depth. I actually like what they ended up doing. I thought they did more than I thought they could do this offseason, which we talked about a couple shows ago. But yeah, lots. I mean, it's true. You invested in one of the most expensive teams that we've ever seen, or expensive trios that we've ever seen.
Yeah,
and now you got to
better work out
that it's going to work. Okay, the next prove it team here. As we said, there's so many more options, I think, in the East.
There are,
more
in my opinion,
obvious options, because there's a lot of middling teams. In the West, you either have like teams that are pretty much in the mix because they have superstars, or they're rebuilding in a lot of ways. So I think what I'm going to go with here is New Orleans, only because of somewhat similar reasoning to why I went with the Clippers. While they have a young core still, the trade rumors, they sparked up again. There's now seemingly a time limit. While unlike Los Angeles, you do have Ingram and Zion under contract moving forward. Let me quickly look actually how much longer Ingram is going to be under contract here, because he should be up for.
He's getting there.
He signed his extension, like his rookie scale extension a few years ago. So he has 1 year left, guaranteed. So it's not an option or anything. And so 2 years from now, he'll be a free agent. And he's been playing very, very well. Honestly, his growth is gone a little bit underrated, just because New Orleans it's like, I feel like every time New Orleans gets into that top 8 in the West, or like the top 6, and then it's like everyone's like Ingram, and then they start to fall back out and they forget a little bit of how good Ingram has been. But basically for them, this is a situation where Zion has been in tons of trade rumors over the past handful of months. They now really have to decide whether or not they're going to keep the core of him and Ingram together, whether it makes sense, whether Williamson can even stay on the floor.
Don't
you
think he
know,
can.
it's definitely a big concern. Every time he is on the floor, he looks amazing, which is why trading him is probably an extremely difficult decision. But um, yeah, there's a time limit, I think, on the type of team they want to be, and they have a lot of young guys. I like guys in Trey Murphy. They have Jose Alvarado, who's obviously turned into a nice piece. Najee Marshall. Um, I'm just pulling up the roster here from last season. I personally like a guy like Dyson Daniels a lot, but they have some of these young rotational players that they can kind of continue to build around moving forward. But none of them are these superstars. So you got to either commit to, you got to commit to one of Ingram and
Zion's
Zion,
got to play.
and
He's got to play. And
yeah,
I
and
don't know if it all almost stems more to him needing to prove it than this roster. But like, if they're going to
yeah,
have
you're
the
right. It
roster
does.
constructed the way that they want to, like this, and it's also for the organization because right now they're still believing in Zion. They didn't move him. Like Zion needs to prove it and play. I'm not even going to say a full season. He needs to play 55 games this year. Like, give me 55.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, when you look at it, he's played the most games he's ever played in his career is 61 in his second year. So if he's not, around that mark, there's going to, after missing the entirety of the 2021-2022 season, only playing 29 games last season. And then now it's this year. It's like, okay, are you going to get back on the right track? And I also think the relationship between him and New Orleans seems to be very strange in terms of him and the organization. Every time that people bring it up, there's always, the Pelicans and Zion always complain like, no, we're fine, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know. If he has one more year where he can't stay on the floor, no one's going to be surprised, I think, if the organization looks at it and goes, okay, I think it's time to move him, and it's time to try to do something different, maybe with Ingram at the center of it and whatever we get in a Zion package.
That's probably why I would have tried to package him already, because I like the value is just going to get worse if you end up wanting to move him. And he's never shown he can consistently play basketball. And it's just hard
because either the value gets worse or he stays on the floor and you have a team that's competing maybe for a top 5, spot in the West, because I do think that they're capable of that if he stays on the floor. But if he doesn't, then his value plummets. So it's risky business staying in the Zion business.
All right, I got one more.
Yeah, we can each give.
I got one more prove it team.
Okay, go for it.
I'm going with Dallas. I know I talked about them in the power rankings, but like, they doubled down on Luka and Kyrie, extending Kyrie, or I guess re-signing, I guess was what we would call it, because he technically did hit free agency. But they're doubling down with a pair of superstars that failed miserably last year after that deal. It didn't work out, but they extended Kyrie. Luka's under contract for, I think, 3 more seasons now, but like, also maybe one bad season away from pulling the NBA superstar move and saying, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to play with Kyrie. I want out. And then they're kind of going to have to oblige. They've kind of painted themselves into this corner of that superstar duo needing to work out, or else this Luka era is going to be seen as a massive waste and, failure, and a waste of an elite talent in Luka Doncic. So there's a lot going on there, and they need to figure it out very quickly, because the end of last year was just god awful. I need to see Kyrie play more. I need to see those two work together.
Right. No, it's the Doncic thing is confusing. I think that as long as he's happy there, then they're always going to be in it. They're always going to have a chance. But when you commit yourself to Kyrie, like, immediate questions begin to emerge about just about whether or not your team, your locker room can stay healthy, whether or not Kyrie will even stay on the floor. And I just don't know. You already seem to be rocky with Doncic. Adding someone like Kyrie into the mix is scary. I at least like I like Seth Curry, the addition for them this offseason. I like, like the Richaun Holmes, maybe he plays for them a little bit. That was at least a smart trade on draft night, the way that they handled that. Grant Williams was a very good addition for them. I think he's a perfect kind of guy to put next to Luka, especially when, they need more defense around Kyrie and Doncic. I think Grant Williams, and he also kind of gives that for a lack of better terms, like moxie, that maybe those two guys aren't gonna.
Yeah.
I mean, Doncic will get a little bit chippy sometimes, and he has that kind of alpha mentality. But the Grant Williams kind of replaces the Dorian Finney-Smith hole that they created for themselves when they traded for Kyrie, and Dorian Finney-Smith was massively important to that roster. So Grant Williams is going to be very important there. And then, Olivier Maxence Prosper, drafting him in the draft. I like that addition for him, another versatile forward. So like, I actually like their what they've done in terms of adding depth, because they kind of got rid of a lot of their depth when they added Kyrie, and there was maybe,
and that ended up being the problem because Kyrie just didn't really play.
Like, yeah, it just stretch. Right,
and it was like, all right, we don't have Kyrie or the depth now.
Yeah, and they still have some nice young guys, and like Josh Green and Jaden Hardy, and maybe one of those guys can become a good bench scorer for them. So there's Derek Lively, the second they obviously drafted, and maybe he becomes the center of their future. That's kind of the biggest hole they have right now, is they need to find somebody to play consistently for them at center. They still have Dwight Powell, but Christian Wood is likely out the door. So yeah, it's their roster's just kind of in a confusing place. Like, when you thought of what this many years into Doncic would look like, you kind of thought it would look a lot different than how it's been. And we've seen, but we know that as long as he's there, he can bring pretty much any roster to, I think, the Western Conference Final individually by himself. Yeah. We saw him do it 2 years ago. So can this roster end up shockingly getting to the West Finals? Sure, why not? It has Doncic. As long as Doncic is there, then I believe it's possible. But it's just you create a very rocky scenario for yourself when you throw Kyrie into the mix, and when you don't even make the playoffs with somebody who is a superstar like Doncic. The spotlight gets hotter and hotter on you. Last thing that I'll throw in there, we kind of each picked 2 already, so that's kind of what we did last time.
If you got a bonus one, go ahead. I'll allow it.
Okay, thank you. I think the only other team to kind of throw in there is probably Golden State. Not just because they move on from a young piece in Jordan Poole. They add Chris Paul. The clock continues to tick on their long-term outlook. I don't know if it's a great pick by me, just because they did just re-sign Draymond to a 4-year deal. Steph is still going to be amazing, but I think what I need to see this season is, are you still considered among the elites? I'm never going to not consider you that until you prove that you aren't.
Yeah.
I'm still going to.
It's like the Patriots with Tom Brady. Like, they could finish 9-7, sneak into the playoffs, and I'm still going to think that they're going to make a run.
Right. But I think it's just more of, it's going to happen inevitably where, guys move into new stages of their career. I think we've already seen it a bit with Klay Thompson. Is this do we start to see it more with Draymond Green? And like we said, there's a lack of young talent now. They could even end up trading a guy like Kuminga to get another veteran piece and things like that. So I think I'm just interested this year. It's maybe less of a prove it thing and more just, I am still very interested in the Warriors, because I'm like, okay, are you going to still be like super believable this year in terms of, oh yeah, this team definitely looks like they're a finals threat, or like, do you begin to see the Warriors start to creep down into the play, more towards the play-in tournament? I don't think that's going to happen this year, maybe just because since they did go all in on the veteran stuff for one more year, they should be at the top. But I just have my eye on them moving forward, is like, can they prove that they can just continue to drag this thing out? Because it's been remarkably impressive that they already have been able to go as long as they can, and that they won a championship last season without, or 2 seasons ago at this point, without, Kevin Durant in the mix, and Curry was just able to do it again. So how much longer can you continue to go is always the question. And I'm just fascinated to see how that ends up looking this year.
Yeah, not the way I would have gone with prove-it teams, but I like how you did the way you explained yourself there. Similar to how I kind of explained my Celtics thing last week. But yeah, it's every year is like a, can you prove that you can keep this going? Because it does seem like it's taken it 1 year at a time with that Warriors team, because the core is getting very old. They are dipping deeper and deeper into investing in win now veterans, and some point it's going to bite them. And when it does, and when Steph decides to hang them up, and then all those veterans start to go away, it's going to get real bad for a little while. But I mean, they'll always have the dynasty eras to look back
at. And the last quick thing I'll say on it is that the front office change is a big deal. Bob Myers leaving And Mike Dunleavy, former Bull, shout out,
Bulls
Mike
legend,
Dunleavy Jr.
Mike Dunleavy Jr.
Taking over the front office, and he's the one that did this, right? He's the one that said we're just gonna go all in on the veterans. We're getting rid of Jordan Poole. I'm not gonna try to do this straddling both ends of the spectrum and have youngsters on the bench, but.
Which I like. They picked a lane. Like there's nothing wrong with picking a lane.
But the fact that Bob Myers even was like, I think it's time for me to go, is always a little bit like, why are you leaving a team that has been a dynasty and has won this many championships? It's like, does that tell me a little bit something about, it could be nothing. It could be him just having a hangover and being like, I'm done with this. Or it could be him being like, I see the end of this myself. And, so that now it's like Mike Dunleavy has to prove, all right, I can continue this thing going and keep this thing
It's
going.
rare in sports when somebody hangs them up a year too early as opposed to a year too late, but maybe that's kind of what Bob Myers is doing here. Just like rather go out on top than keep trying to hang on for one more when he knows that the end's probably near. He's like, you know what? I'd rather just go out on top early than, maybe a year too early than drag this thing out and hang out for too long and kind of have to oversee a rebuild and be the guy in charge when this thing does go down. Which it will happen at some point. Not saying it's going to happen this year.
Right.
But
all right, so I think that's a good summary there. Just we picked Clippers, Phoenix. Who else did we have? We had
Dallas. You had New Orleans.
Dallas and New Orleans, and then I just threw down Golden State. I just had thoughts on Golden State, so this is where I'm dumping those thoughts for now. But otherwise, I think that wraps things up. Another swift episode. That's I think we touched on the biggest things of the week, and. That's it. I hurt my thumb playing basketball, second straight injury in a row, and that's that.
Well, maybe it's time for you to hang them up a little.
Yeah, like talking about guys hanging it up. I've just played 2 games and I already need to hang it up. Yeah. It was my body is. You feel yourself aging when you try to play basketball. All right, that's all we got. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Remember, you can subscribe if you drop a rating. That's great, too. Always helps. And we'll have more basketball next week.